Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call the official meeting to order. This is the Legislative and Strategic Planning Committee meeting. Just make sure you're all here and for the right committee. And we're going to stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, is there any public comment? We're checking. Thank you. No? Okay, there's no public comment, and I'll ask you I need a motion to approve the minutes from the April 25th.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Like sign opposed. Show that passed. I guess we have public comment again, but there is none. We see that. Okay, I do want to tell you all, I apologize. I'm going to have to step out of this meeting for about 20 minutes. My very able vice chair over here is going to take control. There is no voting on the presentation, but I'll be right back. Sorry, my staff scheduled 2 important meetings at the same time. It happens. So I'll turn it over to Mickey, and I'll step out for a few minutes. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. With that, we'll go right into our presentations, and the first one, adopting new fuel technologies, with Mr. Fetzer. Or maybe not.
I'll only be here for a moment. Good morning. Jeff Seward, Chief Financial Officer. This morning's conversation concerns alternate fueling strategies for our fleet and looking at options for organization. Prior to turning it over to staff, I wanted to make a couple of quick comments of how the presentation you're going to see this morning is staged. The first component of the presentation concerns our current use of compressed natural gas as not only our primary fueling component for our fleet as we migrate away from diesel, but a discussion as it is a cornerstone and linchpin to your environmental policy that was adopted 4 years ago. We have a goal as an organization which has been recognized not only nationally but internationally as well as cutting edge for a transit agency. And that goal is to reduce 4,285 metric tons of carbon by our carbon footprint reduction by 2018, which is a 17% reduction. To date, coupling the move to compressed natural gas as well as changes in our scheduling and routing techniques, we've been able to reduce that footprint by 16%, which is ahead of schedule and which is way ahead of our peers internationally, moving away from carbon-based fuel sources. To date, we have invested $36 million in our CNG technology. That was a combination of both the fueling station and our vehicles, which is primarily federal investments. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to first Mr. Thomas Jones. He is our environmental manager. He's going to walk you through the impacts of our move to compressed natural gas. Mr. Fetzer will then talk to you about the comparison as we move forward, looking at alternate technologies, of what that process would look like between compressed natural gas and electric. And then both Mr. Jones and Justin Begley will come up and talk to you about a concept project that we're looking at, which would incorporate some use of electric vehicle technology in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Jones.
Morning, Thomas Jones, Environmental Program Manager, and actually the first couple of slides are Jim. So,
good morning. My name is Jim Fetzer. I'm Director of Maintenance here at HART. Just want to give a brief presentation this morning about comparisons between CNG and electric buses. Let's see if I operate this correctly. Current bus inventory in the United States, I thought it was important to point this out. Diesel buses are still dominating the market, but there are other technologies that are coming on board. 16.9% of the technology or the buses on the road are hybrid electric, and then 16.7% are CNG, and then other alternative fuels, which include hydrogen powered and electric power, less than 1%. Our current fleet, we have 191 fixed route buses, 35 CNG buses in service currently, and we're going to take delivery of another 25 this year, so we'll have 60 CNG buses in service. And I wanted to point out the lower operating cost of CNG was definitely a good move, but comparison internally of our operating cost per mile, diesel bus 24 cents per mile for maintenance, CNG has been 10%. Fuel costs 47 cents per mile for diesel, 29 cents for CNG. And then total cost per mile for diesel is 71 cents, and CNG is 39, almost half of what a diesel bus is. And now I'll turn it over to Thomas.
So real quick, just want to explain the infographic that you're looking at. And Jeff kind of alluded to this in his introduction. This is a graph showing our carbon from the revenue fleet from our baseline year, which was 2013. 2013 was the last year in which we had a fleet with no alternative fuel technology. So that fleet was an all diesel, all unleaded fleet. What you're looking at is CO2 emissions per vehicle revenue hour. We use best management practices for quantifying greenhouse gases for transportation, which you normalize that data either with revenue miles or revenue hours. And so what you're looking at is in 13, we were just above 1 metric ton per revenue hour, and declining from calendar year, and these are calendar years, 14, 15, and 16, down to 0.83 metric tons per revenue hour, which is a 22% reduction to date. We currently track this data as part of the environmental management system, and I think everybody's pretty happy with what we've been able to do so far. So that's basically it. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of what you're looking at.
Our next slide just shows our fuel consumption by type through years 2013 through 2016. The orange graph shows diesel gallons. The gray is gasoline, and then the blue is CNG, and you can see our CNG has increased up in 2016. Sorry, I'm missing a slide. In any case, I'm going to move it over to electric bus market. Currently, there are 4 manufacturers of electric buses. One is Build Your Dream, which is international supplier of buses, really the one dominating the market across the world. Proterra is a U.S.-based company, really the largest supplier in the United States currently, and then you have New Flyer and Nova that are just getting into the business of electric bus. To do the comparison this morning, I really wanted to use data that was factual and not listen to the manufacturer's data, because we all know that sometimes isn't exactly accurate. So I used the Foothill Transit Battery Electric Bus Demonstration Results study that was conducted by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory from the U.S. Department of Energy. That was just completed last year. And it was a comprehensive operating and capital cost comparison of CNG versus electric buses at Foothill Transit in Los Angeles, California. And the study included 12 Proterra electric buses and 8 NABI CNG-powered buses. And it was conducted April 2014 through July of 2015. And you can see the results here. Fuel economy, diesel gallon equivalent, MPG, electric bus 17.4, CNG 4.51, miles between road calls, 9,300 for electric bus, 45,000 for CNG. Purchase price of the bus, $904,000 for electric, $575 for CNG. And the maintenance cost per mile were pretty similar, 18 cents for electric, 16 cents for CNG. Energy cost per mile turned out to be 39 cents per mile for electric and 23 cents per mile for CNG. And total operating cost, electric 55 cents a mile and 41 cents a mile for CNG. Some of the range is a big issue with electric buses. With CNG, of course, you can go 400 miles without filling the bus up. With electric, you have up to 350 miles based on what the manufacturer states. But those ranges really vary based on the heat, the driving habits, stop and go, air conditioning usage. So it's requiring a charging station en route as you're operating the bus. It takes 10 or 15 minutes at the end of each line to recharge the bus to a certain level so it can make it to the next route. Initial capital investment for electric bus, Proterra currently costs $800,000. If you would implement here at HART, you'd have to get overnight chargers, $50,000 per bus, and then you'd have to put in fast charge stations at a cost of $750,000 to $1 million per station. Internally, I just put together a scenario comparing 20 buses. If we had 20 CNG versus 20 electric, I did a comparison of the capital cost per mile. And of course, you have the cost of the bus, the number of buses. A CNG station cost, which I included, is $5.5 million. Charge station, I included 4 at $1 million per station. The chargers that are required for the buses, and then came up with a total capital cost per mile, $3 for electric and $2.28 for CNG. Conclusion, electric bus technology is improving rapidly, that's clear. The capital and operating costs are higher than CNG. The electric bus cost is decreasing as technology improves, and it's gone down quite a bit in the last 10 years, or 5 years, I'm sorry. Long-term maintenance costs for electric buses are unknown. One concern is the battery life, because if your batteries go out on an electric bus, they're quite expensive to replace. There would be maintenance considerations. We'd have to retrain our mechanics if we go to an electric-style bus. Also, we have inventory concerns that Jeff talked about earlier. 60 CNG buses at $515,000 per bus, plus our CNG infrastructure cost as well, our fueling station investment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. You were going to conclude? No. Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm concluding off. I apologize about that, but I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Would you say this is a first generation electric bus system? I mean, that's currently on the market?
I do. I think they haven't been out long enough to go through a full life of an electric bus. So battery life is really questionable right now. That's a huge concern because, like I said earlier, battery replacement costs are very expensive.
Well, I think it's very important to track it. I think the evolution will go fast once it hits
I agree.
the road,
Yeah.
no pun intended. And battery life is the next generation of exponential growth across from our little handhelds to our electric cars to electric buses. So, I think you have to make wise and smart decisions in terms of investing the capital that we have to move the people that need to be moved. But I do think it's important that we track new technology options and be fully aware and briefed and informed as to what's happening in the marketplace as a comparison and competitive basis. So I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you. Can you tell me what investment, I didn't quite catch at the beginning, the investment that we now have in CNG?
I believe that was $30 million, Jeff? $36 million in CNG. That includes buses and the fueling stations and infrastructure.
What about the fueling stations? Oops, I don't know why I'm...
Our initial compressor investment, I think, was $5.5 million, and that has a useful life, I believe, of 20 years. So we had a big upfront investment for fueling.
But we could still be using that for the next 20 years. I mean, we could have a duplicate fleet, some electric and some CNG. Well, how does this affect, because I know we've talked about having to expand our maintenance facilities, that's a real need. How does that play into, CNG versus electric and our future facility needs? How does that work?
In my opinion, it would take more space because you'd have to install charging stations at the facility, and currently we're pretty tight at the facility. You'd also have to bring high voltage electric into the facility that we don't currently have, so that would be in consideration as well.
I know we've talked about we've talked about having a major second facility, from what I understand, or being able to maybe have smaller facilities. And I just wondered if either of these technologies, makes that possible or works better.
In the previous plans where we'd been ramping up for Go Hillsborough, it was predicated on having a second maintenance facility for buses and a separate one for van. Where we are now, not looking at that revenue changing, we've been working with the MPO to do a study for us on What were the considerations in going into a second facility? And the first blush of the study came back saying, here's how you build a second one. We've gone back to the consultants now saying, okay, that's not what we need. What we need to know is how many vehicles can we hold at our current facility? What are the constraints, and what's the most prudent way to go forward? So we would be looking at shared facilities. And I think where you're going is, could we look at something like charging for certain vehicles, perhaps at a South County location, if we went to smaller electrical vehicles? I think the presentation is going to wrap up with information from Thomas Jones about what we're looking at for low-no vehicles, so we can start getting into that electrical footprint, and we can learn a little more about if the vehicles are off-site, what can we do without having to go to an entirely new facility, what's going to be more cost-effective to allow us to serve the county.
Mm-hmm. And the other I wondered about is the charging needs right now. I know it is changing dramatically. I don't know if others caught this, but when we had the automated vehicles here in town in November, they would charge for 8 hours and work with air conditioning for 6. That was in November, but there's going to be a 30% improvement by the time we have them this year, so that they'll charge for 8 hours and work for 9. That's how, excuse me, that's how fast the battery technology is really adapting. And I'm just wondering about, in terms of what it is right now or expected maybe in the next year or two, when you talked about charging during the trip, because I've heard different things about that, and that our staff, anyway, they have built-in 15-minute breaks every 4 hours, I think. And they were talking about, I've read about other places where the charging goes on then.
I'll defer to Jim on that. The way our runs are configured, we would have a certain amount of recovery at the end of each run. We can't guarantee that we'll be there. So, for instance, a 34 might have a 17-minute recovery at Net Park. With traffic, et cetera, wheelchairs, it could end up being a 5-minute recovery. So one of the issues would be, if we need a hard 10 or 15 minutes, it's great to get the operator off the street, but that could make us end up being late on the next run. But Jim, you obviously know more about this than I do.
I've had a little bit of experience with electric vehicles, but it really depends. Again, it's hard to say until you put the bus in service, because it depends on start and go, or stopping, starting, air conditioning use. The heat outside actually plays some role on how long the batteries last. The hotter it is, the less life the battery has. So it really depends. The driving habits, if it's on an express route versus stop and go, so it really varies. But definitely, if you have a route that's out there for several hours, you have to have a charging station.
And I guess it is wonderful what we did with the transition from diesel to CNG. Impressive, just in terms of greenhouse gases, but also in terms of our bottom line and what that is done. But what is the trajectory, or is there any is it flat right now for CNG costs in terms of, or is it I have concerns about it being a rising fuel cost.
They say natural gas supply is very plentiful right now, and it's expected to be very stable over the next 10 years or whatever. We get CNG at a very good price here, I must say. And our fuel cost, I think we've cut our fuel costs nearly in half over the last 4 years because of the CNG implementation. So I'm very comfortable with where fuel prices are going with CNG. It's produced in the United States. We have an adequate supply, so I think it's going to remain stable.
And has it remained stable in the last 5 years? Has there been any changes, up or down?
We've actually seen a slight decrease in cost, so it's been very positive.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Turn over. I'm
Director
sorry.
Jarosh, and then
Yeah, so I'm looking at the comparison that slide you have between the electric bus and the CNG bus, and it looks like almost every category the CNG performs better. Is the benefit to electric versus CNG, or what is the main benefit? Is it greenhouse gas emission?
I think it's the perception of the bus being very clean and also the quietness of the coach. Those are two main things. If you're in a congested urban area, no emissions is really a positive. But you also have to look at the side. They say zero emission, but it depends on how your electricity is produced, because they're truly not zero emission. If it's a coal-fired electric plant, it's producing pollutants.
Right. Which is where I was going to go. Do we get our electricity primarily from TECO?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay, because TECO, from what I understand, they produce about 5,000 megawatts of energy, and of that, I think approximately 1,500 to 1,600, or a third of that, is coal. So I would almost contend if we were to run electric buses today, we'd actually have more net emissions. Coal, emission is much worse. And then the rest, the bulk of their remaining power generation is natural gas. And since we would be running on natural gas, we're probably a little bit more efficient just because, as you transmit that power down the line to get to the, in the wall to where you can plug it in, you have some energy losses along the way. So I just wanted to put that in. If we ever do further calculations and it involves greenhouse emissions, that we, look. Now, I know TECO is going to solar. Currently, I think they have 25 out of the 5,000 is solar. So just something to keep in mind as we do these calculations in the future.
Thank you.
Director Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Chair. Actually, Mr. Roach, you kind of stole my thunder there. I wanted to make that exact point. I think, referencing the slide, the revenue fleet carbon performance slide, I think that as we monitor this, I would definitely want that the point, the original source of the, fuel, to, in this case electric, to be tracked as well and factored into the comparison. It's great to see that our costs have gone down and our emissions have gone down. That's just such a great thing.
Yes.
So,
very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Why don't I ask Director Bowers first, and then we'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'm looking at your chart, CNG versus electric, and I look at all of the breakdowns of the cost. Taking all the variables into consideration, what would be the advantage, or what advantage we need to look for in overall cost? I see the electric bus costs almost, not really, but almost double what the CNG costs. And CNG on overall span is a lot cheaper in terms of operation. What would be the advantage?
I think perception of lower emissions in the community is a huge thing. CNG, if it remains stable, it's going to be hard to beat as far as electric, because electric rates vary so much. And I think it's more the perception of green with the electric bus, and the quietness, I think, in an urban environment is important as well.
After
Then Commissioner Kemp, and then back to you, Director Melendez.
I just wanted to make a couple points, and one is you spoke to TECO, and I was down there. They have 23 megawatts that they just opened in Apollo Beach, but they are very enthusiastic about moving forward because of the low cost of solar, and they're not making it for greenhouse gas decisions. They're making it because the bottom line is that it's a much cheaper fuel source, and we have such a blessing of our solar power. One of the things that I would like to see measured in this when we're considering it is capital versus operating. That I think comes forward in a very positive way. And I do have concerns about future CNG costs, and I know a lot of bus agencies or transit agencies around the country are making decisions now to, like Miami just received a special grant to do 3 buses, but went in addition and bought 30 electric buses because they decided it was a good investment in terms of their bottom line. But one of the things about investing in electric vehicles is that we have capital. The Federal Transit Agency covers 80%, as I understand, of the investment, so that and if we have it matched with capital, our operating, then we're looking at not our capital investment at all or very little, as opposed to our operating costs and further operating costs, which is where these buses save the most dollars. The other is that we're able to set up our own mini stations, at least in some way. We could start to solar power and use that in a very cost-effective way, putting panels on our buildings or others. So I'm just wondering about any of that.
Those are good points, and I do think as electricity or electric buses and the technology improves, that we need to take a more serious look at electric buses. It's clear right now, though, CNG was a very good decision for this agency to make. I've worked all over the country, and I've never seen I did have some information on the decreasing fuel costs. That we've almost cut our fuel bill in half since we went to CNG. It was tremendous, plus the emission savings. So I do think, I think electric is an emerging technology. I'm not sure if we're quite there yet.
This is not, by the way, I was not critiquing that choice that was made at that time.
Yeah.
I'm just looking forward.
Absolutely.
And to clarify, the capital we can use up to 80% of federal funding, but it's a finite dollar amount. So the money is not 80% for 10 vehicles. It's up to, let's just say, $5 million toward that we have allocated, and we can purchase as many vehicles as we can get 80%.
Thank you.
But you are correct. It's 20% out of the local pocket.
You good?
I'll turn it over to Thomas. He's going to wrap up the presentation.
Do you mind if I ask you one question?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saving me for last. So.
Okay.
I guess my question revolves around, I think it was brought up before, the maintenance facility and the ability of the maintenance facility to take on this new space in order to accommodate electric buses. I assume we're talking about 40-foot buses. After touring the facility and understanding the space constraints that you have now, certainly I think that'll be a challenge. And secondarily, what are the costs associated with the training involved of the maintenance personnel in order to get them up to speed on the electric technology, I think is another consideration. And then lastly, are we looking at all of the vehicles? In other words, does it make sense to continue on with CNG for our 40-foot buses, but other vehicles look at the technology that's available already for our vans or our crossover vehicles that we use for other services, that technology may be further ahead than what we're doing for 40-foot buses, and that may be a transition in terms of more cost-effective for us, better performance, better maintenance, that kind of thing. So,
absolutely. All right. As far as space, yes, we do have major concerns with space, and I think training would be a major consideration, because when you have mechanics who are used to working on gas and diesel buses and then going over to high voltage electric, you have to make sure that those employees are well trained so they don't get injured, obviously. So I think there would be a huge component with training.
okay.
All right. Thomas, you want to wrap it up?
Okay, well, wait, one more. Director Melendez, you
I'm
want
sorry,
to jump in?
I just had one other thought. When you mentioned the training and during the presentation, it was noted that the vehicles have to be charged. I think it was an inductance overhead charger, possibly.
There's inductive, or there's the drop down where it actually drops onto contacts under the vehicle. There's two types.
And those were off-site?
Yes, those would be on the road. You put them in a layover location, and then in-house you have slow charging overnight.
Right. So, and I only bring that up because we would also have to factor in potential right-of-way costs to, accommodate a charge and on-route charging station. Just a future thought again as we monitor. So,
excellent. Thank you, Thomas.
So I think you all have really kind of framed the entire dialogue very well. Obviously, we have operational constraints that we have to consider, but to Ms. Shanahan's point, how do we stay abreast of emerging technologies at the same time as providing the service that we provide with those operational constraints that we have? So I just want to kind of talk to you about briefly about a concept that Justin and I have been talking about that would kind of allow us to, experiment or learn more about EV vehicles and EV infrastructure, while also, not taking for granted the operational constraints. And so the slide that you're looking at is it's actually three different efforts, three different projects. The bottom left-hand slide is a grant that was applied for by USF in partnership with HART. It's the Transit Idea Grant, and USF is looking at making a decision or creating a decision-making tool that will be used to decide where you would place wireless power transfer inductive charging infrastructure in urban settings along your routes to sustain service for an EV bus. Additionally, you all are aware that we've gotten FDOT funds for the AV project on the Marion Transitway. So the Low-No grant, which is open right now for application, just came out. And when you look at the history of the grant, at least last year, There were 20 awardees, all of which was an EV project of some sort, either an EV bus or an EV infrastructure. Last year, we applied for that grant with a CNG application for the purchase of buses, and we were not successful in that application. So we've been discussing a concept, and this is very high level. I mean, we've had internal discussions, and it involves a regional partner, but we have yet to have any dialogue with the regional partner. But one of the things that we're looking at as a concept for the Low-No grant is an application for EV infrastructure along Marion Transitway. And that EV infrastructure could peripherally and tertiary be used to support the AV project, as well as maybe future projects like Hyperlink downtown and things like that. But the primary focus for this particular application would be the 100X that runs into downtown from PSTA into MTC. PSTA already has 3 EV buses. They may be even applying for an EV bus in this go around. And so what we've been discussing internally is a regional application where we look at can we regionalize the use of the EV bus, which is I would argue is a far greater endeavor than any individual agency attempting to use an EV bus within their own operating domains. So that's basically in a nutshell that's kind of something that we're working on. We got a couple of days here left in this week where we either are going to find out whether it's a go or no go. But staff thought it was important to obviously let you guys know that we are evaluating the use. I think Mr. Jacob, you hit it on the head. There are other vehicles, there are other technologies other than EV bus that would allow us to put the service within our operations that may not be as intrusive in terms of dealing with it from an operational perspective. So we're definitely trying to balance all those different variables and factors.
Director Jarosh, you had a comment?
Yeah, just curious, the CNG grant that we applied for, do you know how much it was for and how many buses it would have purchased?
Yeah, it was the grant application. I believe it was 24 million, and I think that was 30 some odd buses. Now, there was a $55 million pot, but when we do these grant applications, one of the questions is the project scalable? So although we put in an application for a large volume of money and a large number of buses, we did indicate that it was scalable and that we would take whatever would come from the grant.
Okay, and so we would be doing this new innovative grant rather than reapply for the CNG grant?
That is the hope, but again, it's high level concept, and it would require some team ball, so to speak.
And when is this grant application date?
It's in the middle of next month, June,
Okay,
or
so
I think it's June
okay.
25th or 6th. We have an internal date of June 15th to have our application done.
Okay, I was going to suggest if there was a way to kind of wait and see where the current administration is going, because I know so much as far as federal dollars is going to be changing.
Yes, but
I haven't seen much of anything changing yet.
Right. So, but my point being, I'm not. I'm a little wary if we have an opportunity, given our financial situation, to, get some money for the CNG buses, which is where we're going in the short term and where we have a short-term financial need. Mm-hmm. Given that we don't have any plans to expand with electric buses other than the Marion Street, I don't know. That's just my initial thoughts, is if it comes at the cost of maybe not getting, probably not the 24 million, but, what if it was 10 million, so we could buy 16 CNG 40-foot buses.
I will say this: the for this particular grant, the deck is a little bit stacked. I mean, if you look at the awardees from last year, and I can't say that I went past last year, but I did look at last year's, and all 20 awardees were EV related.
Okay, so they didn't do any.
No.
Okay.
No other alternative.
Yeah, he said that.
2050.
One hydrogen fuel cell award and everything else.
Right.
So
okay.
last 2 cycles, we haven't had anything other than an EV.
And that's a shame, because if it's a low or no emission, and most of our a large proportion of our electricity is still coal-fired, I'm thinking our CNG buses, if we were to have electric buses right now, in fact, I would like to compare a PSTA electric bus and their emissions given, I don't know, maybe Florida Power is different versus a CNG. But anyhow, that's a little editorial, but thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Commissioner Kemp?
Well,
Recognize.
again, we could look at our own electricity generation, but based on that grant history, I think it makes total and perfect sense for us to move forward with an EV project of some sort, and it's exciting to hear that. It's also a regional cooperative EV project, so that makes a lot of sense to me. We are moving to an EV future in all ways. In just, I think it was 2010, there were 3 EV vehicles to choose from in the whole country, and now we're up to, this year, 90 different EV vehicles. They project by 2020 it's going to be 110 EV vehicles. I have different this year for consumer use. It's just very quickly moving in that direction. And with concerns with greenhouse gases, I would like to see us producing our own source to the most we could. And I have no doubt that TECO is moving forward, as I said, with solar, since solar is such a much lower cost alternative for them to produce.
And can I ask a question? The difference between the electric and the CNG, are there different types? Is one vehicle favorable over another as far as these high produce? Well, I would imagine CNG would be preferable for these high ridership routes, right? But the low ridership routes, would electric be more cost feasible for the lower ridership routes?
At this point, it's still more expensive than the CNG, but Director Jacob made the point of looking at smaller vehicles, looking at the shuttle, looking at the Tesla, looking at vans. Might be more scalable at that point.
That's what I think. What I was wanting to hear is that if we're going to different types of vehicles, electric might be more preferable.
And this is where the Hyperlink project is a great example for us, because Transdev is operating them and has all the technical responsibility, but we have a fantastic data set of what that looks like.
Very good.
And jumping in on that as well, I think it was mentioned before that the battery technology is evolving at incredible rates. Mm-hmm. At this point in time, we're seeing it in my industry, in the architecture industry, where we're looking at battery powered office space now as compared to taking it on the grid, and it's smart enough to recharge itself when it needs to recharge. It's some pretty amazing technology. But additionally, when we're looking at EV fleet, we would probably want to look at what vehicles would be the easiest to transition as the battery technology evolves. In other words, changing out battery technology as it evolves with the kind of vehicles that would be more accommodating for that, I think, is part of also what we need to be looking at over time with it. And again, I think it's a strategy on which vehicles we see can perform the best under that particular technology. I think is really kind of a next step I'd love to see us take.
Absolutely. Great. Director Shanahan?
Thank you. I do applaud, as Commissioner Kemp said, the regional approach. The only thing where I thought Director, or whatever we are, Commissioner DeRoche Karen was saying was, because we've had an administration shift in Washington, D.C., I would just validate with some calls that there's still an EV focus within, I'm assuming this is the Department of Transportation grant.
FTA.
Okay, so just to make sure that hasn't changed. I thought that's where she was saying in terms of that would be a significant.
Yeah, you want to see what technology.
It could be, and I haven't talked to anybody up there, so I don't know, but I would definitely validate that they're, on this EV push, and that the, utilities are not suggesting that they should be supporting CNG. So I support the regional approach, but I would just validate the emphasis.
Is this another area we could pursue with HART? I mean, PSTA, as far as our agreement.
That's what they pitched.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize for not being here. It's a very important issue I had to address. But that's, good.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Good. I think we need to have that meeting then sooner than later. with PSTA. We haven't had one in a while. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Thank you very, very much. And we'll move to our next presentation, Scott Pringle. You're becoming quite the famous figure now on transportation. It's good to have you here.
Good morning.
Give us
Thank
an
you for having
update on the regional transit plan,
Absolutely.
feasibility plan.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Scott Pringle. I work for Jacobs Engineering. As Commissioner mentioned, I'm going to give you a quick update as to what we've been doing on the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. We have a lot of information that's up on our website, and I'm going to provide you that address here in a couple of slides. So if you have any additional questions or additional interest in some of the data that is coming out of this effort, please visit us at our website. So before I get started, and this is an important topic, an important sort of message to continually communicate, and it really sort of sets the tempo or the emphasis of what we're doing here for the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. So anytime you're looking at building a new project like this, when you're trying to connect regions, looking at premium transit, there are really three questions that need to be answered. First of all, what is the project? Secondly, how do you fund and operate the project? And who's responsible for maintaining that project? My mission is to focus on that first question. What is that project that we're looking at? What is that project that's going to be the highest performing, most competitive for the Tampa Bay region? We have a lot of opportunities for coordination, and we'll continue to do so over the next approximately year and a half to the conclusion of the study. We work very closely with HART staff, if not weekly, daily basis on this study. We also coordinate with staff from the Pinellas Transit Authority as well as the Pasco Transit Authority. And we take our direction in that consensus to move us forward at major milestones by presenting to the Tampa Bay Area Transportation Management Area Leadership Group, so the TMA in short. They meet bi-monthly. Last meeting we had was at the beginning of April, had a really good conversation about our first major milestone in this effort. Across the bottom of the slide, though, you can see a little bit of the timeline. As far as our coordination with stakeholders and our public outreach, we're going to continue to increase our presence publicly. We've had a lot of opportunities for public meetings where information is presented. But you'll see in the next couple of months, we're going to start having public workshops for different communities in the region. Like I mentioned before, our website is up. We have a survey that's up on our website. So it's, for the most part, the sliding scale of increasing public outreach as we get to essentially a draft plan, which we're hoping to have January of 2018. And what that does at that point, when we have that draft plan, we're going to take a step back and we're going to fully vet that draft plan with the community from January all the way through the end of my contract, which is October 1. So we're going to have a lot of outreach at the beginning and the development of the plan, but then we're going to take that time, spend almost, 8 months, 9 months, just vetting that draft plan with the public.
Can I ask who's on the TMA leadership group?
Sure. Commissioner Kemp is on the TMA leadership group. Commissioner Merman is on the TMA leadership group, and they are representatives of the three MPOs. Hillsborough, Pinellas, and PSDO.
Councilman
The
Harry.
MPO on Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Pasco.
Correct.
And then also added to that are your MPO directors, and I think that's about it.
The airport's also present, as well as the port, too.
And the port.
Thank you.
So, it's a great opportunity to get that consensus, get that leadership. I talked about the public outreach and our approach here. This is that website that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. So it's tbregionaltransit.com. We're going to have bulletins. I talked about our surveys, the community meetings, and the workshops. So bottom line, there's a lot of opportunities to get involved, a lot of opportunities to get out in front of people, to collect input. And again, we're even going to do an even bigger effort when we have that draft plan in January and spend that just vetting that plan with the community. So there are three guiding principles for our effort on this plan. First is we're looking for a project that's going to be the most competitive for those federal state grant dollars. We're also looking at projects that use the most forward-thinking technology. This is really going to come into play when we're looking at transit modes. I think you guys just had a great conversation about some of those technologies here this morning. But at the end of the day, the most important thing, of course, is that it serves us here in Tampa Bay. We're always going to look at Tampa Bay's jobs and population today and the growth into the future. So in following up on those three principles, a little bit more information about those state and grant dollars. It's a great process. It's a very transparent process. It really sets the technical methodology. It's something that's used all across the country. And it really represents decades of transit planning experience in our country. But most importantly is by using that federal state approach to set our technical work, it really leaves all options open. So at the end of the day, whether the region makes a decision to use federal state dollars, private dollars, whatever that funding mix is to build a project after we've identified what the project is, using this approach, everything's available, everything's on the table, we have all options open to us. The evaluation plan, I've simplified it here, but it's really basically, again, 3 key steps. We're finishing up, or we just finished up in April, identifying where are those top performing connections. Our next step, which we're going to be talking about starting here in June, finishing in September, is what can operate on those key connections, and by what, I mean what types of transit modes can serve those connections. And then again, how and when. So the idea is that at the end of this process, we're going to come forward with either a catalyst project or catalyst projects for our region that is essentially the starting point to grow a network, to grow the vision, and identify how and when we can start. Because that's one thing I personally feel has been missing in a lot of past efforts, where we identify the vision, but we don't take that next step and actually identifying this is where you start building that network. So we're going to do that here. That first step, focusing on the where, this is the evaluation criteria that we use to identify the top forming connections, which I'm going to present to you here in a minute. The really important ones is, looking at where the jobs are, where the population densities are, and where people are traveling. When you identify those and you start focusing on those as your starting point for a top performing connection for transit, it's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, the most return on investment, the highest ridership on that investment. So our starting point is based on all the long-range transportation plans that the MPOs have developed. It's a great starting point because it represents a lot of work that's been done over the last decade. Not only that, but it's a publicly vetted process in its own right. So it's a great foundation, a great start. We had over 68 premium transit connections to begin our evaluation in step 1. You can see them in the thin blue lines here. And what we found is there are essentially 5 top performing connections. And when we look at these 5 across the columns, across the top of this matrix, you can start to see that each one of those connections at least ranked in the top 5 of 3 criteria or more. So, for example, if the connection served at least 3 regional activity centers, it ranked in the top 5 for that criteria. Got a point, ended up in that upper echelon. So, and you can see as you go down through the break points for each one of those evaluation criteria, trips to activity centers, that travel that I talked about. Again, we're looking at connections that in 2010 served over 400,000 trips per day. So those top 5 connections here shown graphically. I showed the matrix and the breakdown of the results itself, but I'm going to summarize them quickly here. West Shore, Tampa to Brandon was a top performing connection. It does really well in serving travel and those trips to activity centers. The next is downtown Tampa to USF. This did very well in serving activity centers as well as trips. But unique to this corridor, there's a lot of population density along the corridor, which raised it to the top 5 performing connections. Another top performing connection is Wesley Chapel to downtown Tampa, USF, West Shore, Gateway, and St. Petersburg. This corridor or connection did really well in a number of different criteria. Activity centers, serves a lot of travel, has a lot of density of jobs and population along the route itself. In Pinellas County, a top-performing connection is Clearwater, St. Pete to through Gateway. Again, a lot of activity centers served and economic development potential there. And then another is from Tampa through South Tampa, which again has a lot of jobs, population, job density and population and amenities along the corridor, putting it into that top 5 performing category. Included in our top 5 performing connections is the effort that's currently underway by PSTA. They are in this FTA Small Starts program for bus rapid transit between St. Petersburg and the beaches. And again, this corridor could be a great opportunity for the region to sort of pat itself on the back, beginning that network. Here's an example of a good starting point for premium transit in the Tampa Bay region. So, when you look at those top-performing connections and you look at premium transit or transit opportunities within our region, there's essentially this reoccurring need, this reoccurring vision for transit that we've seen over the last decade. That's represented and shown here in this map. The blue lines are those top-performing connections that I just mentioned. But it cannot be understated the importance of serving those blue lines. For example, those critical regional connections, those green lines, will serve those blue lines. And without the two, neither is going to perform to its best and highest potential. So really what we're looking at is a full network across the region in which all our stakeholders have a role to play, a seat at the table to implement and move forward. My mission is going to be focusing on those blue lines, those top 5 connections that have the most potential, again, for federal state dollars and what have you.
And one point I think that bears stressing is a different focus here is not just finding one big heavy blue line, it's identifying that some of these green line projects might not make it through the sniff test on some of the federal programs, but that means local dollars or state dollars could be used to fund those while you're pursuing some other options for other projects. So you can still take forward several projects looking at different things. One example is the ferry that our county commission has been discussing, and there are a lot of constraints on the federal dollars. That doesn't mean this project doesn't go forward. It means you're going forward with it differently. And there are a lot of corridors in here, for instance, in Pinellas County, the Clearwater to St. Pete connection on CSX is obviously very strong. It doesn't hit Gateway, so for purposes of our analysis and going after state and federal funding, it would not be as competitive as a corridor that hits Gateway, but it doesn't mean that there's not a local project that might be in that corridor that might be attractive that a local area could fund. So again, another point here, looking holistically at the whole region and what complete network makes sense is a little different in this project.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. And then the reality is some of those green lines are probably implemented before some of those blue lines. And, that's really sort of brings us back to my point that all stakeholders in our region have a role to play in building this entire network.
Can I ask you a question? Have you considered adding an element to the plan you're putting together? What can be produced the fastest? People are very interested in, number one, not waiting for 10 to 20 years. Okay, they've already waited 20 years to get their roads fixed, which we're doing in Hillsborough County. But I think there's a sense of urgency involved. I guess I just wanted to ask if the speed. I know federal funding that really slows down the project, so. I guess I'm just asking, is speed to produce the actual route, is that a factor?
Yes, it will be. We're going to establish essentially target dates for implementation, which will be based on, sequence. What can we do quickly? What can we do first? And then how do you build that network as you move into the future? Commissioner, one thing that I find exciting about this go-around and different in the past is the level of private industry interest in the efforts and the amount of folks that have actually been calling me asking for information, very different than times in the past. But to your point that, when we start communicating the schedule and what it takes to build some of these projects, the second I mention, if we use the bigger, higher investment projects using the federal process may take 6 to 10 years, I lose
Yeah,
them immediately. They're not interested.
engaged.
They want something sooner
They're
than that.
disengaged.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I guess maybe it's what project can we produce first to make everybody feel good while we're working on the others?
And I agree completely. And at the beginning of the project, before we had opportunity to coordinate with stakeholders, we were thinking that the outcome would be a catalyst project, and then essentially what comes number one, then what you build second, what you build third. But honestly, after the last couple of months in reaching out and coordinating with a lot of different folks, the sense that I'm getting is it may be multiple catalysts. There might be an opportunity for 2 catalyst projects to begin, and then you start building that network. So as you can see, as the more coordination, the more input we get, we continue to evolve as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kim?
Thank you. I appreciate your comments tremendously. I just think there's exhaustion and doubt, and people are really want something more quickly deployed rather than decades. In a number of years, in their lifetimes, as most people express to me, but talking about in the next decade or sooner, getting something. And I think one really important point is a congestion-proof. That's my definition of the premium transit, looking at congestion-proof avenues. And I was reading through the New Start's final interim policy for application, which is what we talked about. But I went and I was looking at it, and so it was. I just wanted to clarify, because it looks as though that's definitionally. I also have issues with focusing too much on the federal part of this, because it will be at least, I think, 6 to 8 years before we ever see those dollars even be deploy in any way. Before we would be shovel ready, it would be 8 years, maybe 10 years. But in terms of the definitionally, it talks about using and occupying a separate right-of-way for the exclusive use of public transportation, using rail, using a fixed catenary system for a passenger ferry system or for a bus rapid transit system, and exclusively, looks like definitionally takes out express bus that's in high occupancy toll lanes from qualifying. Is that correct?
I would have to look at, there are examples out there. For example, in Houston, Katy Freeway does have an express bus that is operating in the HOV lane, and I do believe they went through the federal process and received a federal grant. Traditionally, and again, Commissioner, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to sort of quote you. I think that comment you made about congestion-proof transit is the right one. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, is that fixed guideway, that opportunity to make sure that we can move a transit vehicle past the congestion, not be stuck in the congestion. So I can do some more research on whether there's other express buses and HOV lanes and provide that to you.
Good.
I have a couple more slides, and then I'll finish.
Oh, do you want to, Shannon?
I knew we had more slides, so.
Yeah, I can take your question. Or
I just really want to, I guess, stay apprised or hear as this process goes on with specificity in terms of how many people you're communicating with.
Sure.
Outside of FDOT and HART. So I mean, I know that I know the process that we went through last time, and I think Commissioner Kemp is right. People are, both exhausted and frustrated, but I think there's any way that you can open up the portal, partner with the chambers. Whoever's got people in their organization should know about this study and know specifically how to engage in the study from a comments or webinar or however you're going to go through your process starting in January. Because it is a big topic. There's lots of people that have an opinion, and I think the whole thing will weigh on how many emails you're communicating with. So that's just my only comment. Mm-hmm. When people talk about it in vagaries, it sends the hair up on the back of my neck, because everybody says how they're communicating with everybody and they end up talking to themselves.
Right. To your point, though, about the chambers, we have essentially created a business leaders group that we've met with once already, and at every milestone we're going to meet with them at least once, if not more. And they're made up of members of all the chambers in the three county region. But if you have anybody that you think should be, for anybody sitting at the dais today, names that you think should be part of that group or of any other groups, please send them to me or to HART staff, and we'll make sure they get invited, because you're absolutely right. We can't just keep talking to ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to go through the last couple of slides. It's very quick. Again, looking at this vision network, what is that? And again, I made that point about our third principle, always making sure at the end of the day we're bringing it back home, looking at how these results serve Tampa Bay. So we looked at, again, the jobs and population growth in the Tampa Bay area, and how does that network, when you lay that over top of our job density, which is this map here, what does that give us? What are we seeing, that coverage or that return on investment? And when you look at both the blue and the green lines, we're serving 6 out of every 10 jobs by 2040 in our 3-county region. And that's approximately 2,000 jobs per mile. So really great return on investment, a lot of great coverage for our entire region. So by that 6 and 10, I'm saying within a half-mile walking distance from either a blue or green line is where you're going to get that 6 out of 10 jobs.
What are we serving today? What would you say that number is?
It is significantly lower. I don't have that number with me. I can provide that.
Okay. Thank you.
Especially because the simple fact is we don't have a regional premium transit service except for our express bus services out there today. Take that same calculation, now you lay it over top of the population densities within our region. You're getting 5 out of every 10 residents served by either the blue or green lines, and again, almost 3,000 residents per mile. So really great density, really great service for our entire region. And then when you actually then look at how many residents don't have cars today that we're serving, and an incredibly important statistic when we're looking at premium transit. And again, with those blue and green lines, what we're seeing is that 6 out of 10 residents by 2040 would be served by this network in this investment in premium transit. Our next steps, I mentioned that earlier, we're kicking off at the June TMA meeting, starting to have a conversation about what modes can best serve those top-performing connections. Just a little bit of information, the June TMA meeting, we do have a gentleman, Mr. Booth, who will be coming down to Tampa from Washington, D.C. to give us an update on where the federal program is in regards to the opportunities for federal funding. So I think that would be really great to hear from Mr. Booth, and I would encourage everybody to join us at that meeting to hear him provide an update. And that concludes where we are today.
Okay.
When is that meeting? What's the date of that?
June 2nd, Friday morning.
Yes. Director Jarosh, you recommend?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. Going back to the map, I guess any of them, you have several of them that have the green lines and the blue lines, the blue being the federal projects and the green being maybe local dollars. Is it safe to conclude then from this presentation that the CSX corridor is not in your list of programs to advance to the federal level?
No, I would disagree.
Okay.
If you look at the Tampa USF connection, there are 2 lines there. We're looking at broad connections. We're not looking at alignments yet. We won't be until we actually get past the mode conversation. Mm-hmm. But roughly speaking, the one to the right of those 2 connections is, for the most part, mirroring that CSX corridor. And including the one in South Tampa is either the CSX corridor or the Selman. It's in that general vicinity.
Okay. So, okay. Oh, very good. And you just brought up something that you have the CSX line, I guess, up 30th Street. That would be the CSX in parallel to, I guess, I-275 corridor. When you're doing these calculations, for each one of those, are we double counting the jobs that each one might be serving since they are so close together?
There is some overlap, yes, because we're looking at a half mile, so there'll be portions where there's overlap. But we look at each route individually, and then we look at each route as a network.
Right.
Too.
Okay. Very good. One of the issues that I have, and I know the study is still early, but something that I really think we need to keep focus on are the people who today rely on transit. I think we need to serve them better. And I think we need to be mindful that if we provide a service that is quicker and cheaper than our current form, that's the way you're going to get more people to use transit. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we're doing this. And I haven't seen any, I guess that's going to come later when you're looking at modes as far as, how long it will take you to get from point A to B, this mode, this mode, this mode. That'll be part of your feasibility calculations. Okay.
Yeah. And I your comment, I agree absolutely. We're definitely looking at that.
Right.
And again, that speed to get people from A to B quickly. Again, and I'm going to use the commissioner's term again, congestion-proof transit is definitely where we want to focus because that's going to give us the speed.
Okay. And speaking of congestion-proof transit, looking also at your blue lines, does this still include the express buses on the Tampa Bay Express project?
It may. It depends upon how we progress and evolve through this project. So obviously you see the line that's essentially mirroring the 275 corridor, whether that's on the interstate and express lanes in its own guideway, that's an opportunity too. And it may actually be either east or west of the interstate, north or south of the interstate. A good example is you look between West Shore and Tampa. You can see how thick those blue lines are there. What that's really representing is there might be an option on Cypress. There might be an option on Kennedy as well as the interstate.
Right. Well, if it were on the express lanes, I would think then that would be one less project that we would have to seek federal funds for because, or at least maybe just the operating portion of it, because the fixed guideway would pretty much be set.
Agreed.
Or at least one of the alternatives. Okay. The other thing, you were talking about sequencing, and I agree, these things take forever. And one of the things I'm hearing on the federal level is that they're looking to speed up the environmental process, looking at NEPA and some things like that to try and, so you're probably up and aware.
Yes.
You've heard. Okay, good. And that would actually be a positive thing coming out of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No? I have a question. I know I spoke to you previously about updating your population projections. Are you in the process of doing that?
Yes, we are.
Because I still see not a lot of growth in South County, and that where all the growth is. So I just want to make sure that we're. Thank you for adding a connector line. I do appreciate that. Because that's where people are going because it's affordable housing and they actually need public transportation the most.
Well, the need is what added the green line. We
Exactly.
saw that growth, and that's why the green line was there. So.
And then the other question I have is at the beginning when you were talking about the regular agency updates. I noticed you have Pasco Board of County Commissioners, but you don't have Hillsborough or Pinellas on there. Are you adding them to your regular agency updates?
The reason that Pasco Board of County Commissioner is on there is because they are the acting board for the Transit Authority. Mm-hmm. So we're coordinating with
Pinellas is too.
Right. So we're primarily coordinating with the elected officials on each one of the 3 transit agency boards.
Okay. So what about our staff? Though at the Hillsborough County.
We actually met with the county staff 2 weeks ago, and we'll keep meeting with them routinely.
Okay.
About a week and a half ago.
I will say I-4 is going to be a major redevelopment project for us, the I-4 corridor, and I'm sure they're probably still talking about getting Brightline or whatever to come in there eventually, but that is going to be a huge redevelopment area.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you. Anybody else? No further comments?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Looks like you're making a lot of progress. Great. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next presentation is an update on the comprehensive operations analysis. This is a service component for the TDP. This committee met April 25th, had a deep dive into the TDP process, what that looked like. We received comment. We are at the point that our consultants are bringing back first draft ideas for what a transformed transit network could look like in Hillsborough County. There is a lot of public comment they've relied on through various projects, talking to our patrons, going back as far as Go Hillsborough, which did have strong comment in it. So this is the first draft of technical recommendations. This incorporates comment from the April 25th meeting. Based on the feedback from this board, we will come back with this and more feedback to the June 5th meeting and do a smaller update to the full board and request approval to kick off the robust public outreach that we do prior to a public hearing to get this information squared away for our budget. Our budget presentations are, of course, in September. So we'll be doing a lot of outreach through the summer, both on the individual presentations and the TDP, and then more targeted briefings still in August after we hold a public hearing. To work with this year's finances, we do need to include information from this in the TDP that feeds into our budget. To scale this, if we're looking at a $6 million change in our budget or in service, each month of that would be delayed as another $500,000 we would have to find in the fiscal year. So, for instance, an October schedule change would get $6 million over the course of the year. By December, we would have to look at a $7 million change for the year to achieve the same dollars throughout the year. And again, stressing the point that fiscal 18 is our year to redo what it means to take public dollars and get you around without driving yourself in Hillsborough County. Both of our more administrative chiefs, both Jeff and Kenyatta Lee, have been very vigorous in their work groups, finding business processes to kick off between various proposals coming in, overhauling how we handle our claims, so on and so forth. And our operations group is poised to act as well based on the information from here. So 18 is a transformative year for us, and the goal is that 18 resets how we spend money, how we do business, so we don't come back in 21 or 22 with yet another conversation of times are tight. It's a new way to do business. And again, please bear in mind these are the consultant recommendations, so whatever you see, we still have some opportunities to move on. And I will turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Excellent introduction. For the record, Joel Ray with Tyndall Auburn, and I'm glad to be here this morning. And as you recall, we did take, as she mentioned, a deep dive into the TDP at the last session, and I promise you the dive this time will not be as deep. In fact, I'd like to go in the other direction and take you at a more 30,000-foot level through the COA. And I'll start by telling you a little bit about what a COA is and compare that to the TDP that we talked about last time. If you recall, we talked about the TDP being this regulatory document that HART has to do in order to receive their block grant funds. But more importantly, it's a vision document that sets the stage for how the system is going to grow over the next 10 years. Now, a COA typically is done either immediately prior to the TDP, or in more cases now, systems do it concurrently with their TDP, where they actually take a snapshot in time look at their existing network, at the existing routes, to see how they're performing and to see if there are tweaks, modifications, truncations, deletions, whatever you want to call them, but changes to the individual routes and the network as a whole that can then either save resources in preparation for some future growth or reallocate resources to those services that are providing better productivity. So that's what we're doing with today's discussion, is we're going to walk you through the changes that we're proposing to the existing network that change the system for the better. And I'm going to go through some guiding principles to explain what that basis was for making the decisions, but also, as Catherine had mentioned, to prepare the system for the budgetary issues that you're going to be addressing in September. Now, the COA results, whatever comes of our discussion, and we'll be taking out to public hearing for the public to weigh in, whatever comes of that will go into the TDP as typically year 1, year 2 implementations. For the most part, we're hoping year 1 to maximize those cost savings, and then the TDP will carry forward the growth from there in years 2 through 10. So what I'm going to talk about today is just give you the guiding principles, take you a little bit through the changes from a frequency standpoint, and then we'll dive into some of the actual route changes, and I'll just briefly touch on those, and if you have questions, please feel free to stop me. So, and we talked about some of these principles the last time I was here in front of you at your last meeting. First, one of the things we want to do, we know that there's been some press lately about travel times and time savings and people not being able to get to work, for example, at the airport on time and taking several hours to do that. So one of the things we felt we needed to make sure we were addressing in the modifications we were making was to improve that experience for the rider.
to try and shorten the travel times, especially on those longer trips. Secondly, we want to try and improve the directness of travel. One of the things that we noticed in the system is a lot of the routes don't have an individual identity. They don't have a true purpose. Part of that issue is the network is set up primarily as a grid, but it also uses a series of hubs that force the routes to bend to them to provide connectivity. So you're almost doing this hybrid between kind of a radial type field with a grid network. And while that can work in some cases, depending on the geography of the land, in other cases it actually creates some redundancy and out of direction travel. So we wanted to try and address that. Now, I talked to you about the continuum of frequency versus coverage, and I heard from this particular group last time that frequency enhancements, improvements in the core network would be beneficial. So we tried to err on that side. We understand that the network is rather large and providing a lot of coverage. We don't want to disenfranchise folks, but we do want to try and deal with the overextension of the existing route structure. And then finally, as Scott, my colleague, because we are on their team for the project he just spoke with you about, and they're on our team for this, to make sure the two studies coordinate, regional connections are going to be very important, so we have to have an eye on how the network is going to best support, especially the near-term implementations that may come out of that other study. And we want to focus on frequency and speed to get folks to those other more premium type services. So with that, I will do the big reveal. Ta-da! This is what we're proposing in terms of your existing route structure on the left, and then you see what we're proposing with the changes we've made to many of the routes on the right, and not just changes in terms of alignment, but also in terms of frequency and how they function. And you can see there, again, that grid-type pattern, and I'll go through these, it's easier to see on individual routes, that the hubs really tend to depersonalize the routes. You're taking them off roadways to provide coverage to these hubs. So let's talk about the frequency improvements and how that's changed with the proposal. Today, you only have one route that is providing service in terms of 15 minutes, and that's Metro Rapid. And with the changes, and this is kind of a snapshot of all of the changes you saw on the previous map, you see that now we're proposing 4 routes to go to 15 or minute better service, and a total of 22 routes to go from either 30 or minute better compared to the 20 that you have in place today. Now, the coverage of service, the percent of services, and this is measured in terms of service hours, you're actually going from 81% of your service hours being 30 minutes or better frequency to 86%, so an increase of 5%. So we are seeing an increase in the frequencies, and you can see there a corresponding decrease in the routes that are 45 and 60-minute service. You will also note that we are proposing a cut of some of the routes, and we're going to go from 41 total routes, and that includes the expresses and the limited expresses, to only 34. And we'll get into some of those to show you what those are. So let's just look at a map of frequency to get you a flavor for how this network is going to build from the most frequent to the least frequent. One of the tenets of a grid pattern is you want to try and establish an east-west spine and a north-south spine, and then everything else builds off of there. Your Metro Rapid makes sense. It's already a 15-minute service. We're going to propose to take that to 12-minute service. That becomes a north-south spine, along with the route on 22nd, the Route 12, shown there by the red line, all the way to the east. And then in the east-west direction, you have Hillsborough, and that is your Route 34, also going to 15-minute service as we have proposed it. And then finally, you'll see the portion of Florida Avenue, that's the Route 1, south of Hillsborough. We're actually going to propose to take Route 1 to 30-minute all day, and then south of Hillsborough will actually become a 15-minute service to provide better frequency down there where there's a lot more activity. We add the 20-minute route, and that is the Route 6 as modified, and we have proposed a modification, and I'll take you through that in a later slide, and that goes to 20. And then you see the network of 30-minute service, quite a few other routes shown there. And then the 60-minute, this is still local service, this is not express, and starting in the north, you see the portion which is now Metro Rapid. We're proposing to make that a separate route that would connect UATC out to Hidden River Park. Then you go to the next one down. That is the connection, the Route 32, the portion that covers Net Park to Mango. That will stay a 60-minute service. The Route 19, configured version of Route 19 that will connect Britain to that South Tampa area, and then out in the east, that is Route 46, also 60-minute service going out to Brandon. So let's look at Express. This is the existing peak hour on the left and your current limited express services shown on these two maps. And you can see there in terms of the total trips that are provided on a daily basis, you're running 88 total trips on the Express. Now, we've got a more significant modification to the Express services. You can see that in terms of peak hour Express, where the buses just travel for commuter purposes in the morning for a few trips and again in the afternoon for a few trips, we're decreasing that significantly down to only a total of 16 trips. It's cut down to only the routes shown there. We're actually reducing trips on the 24 and the 25X. They have excess capacity, so we're going to get folks to better utilize that available capacity by having fewer trips in the morning and afternoon. You see the elimination there of some of the Express. I'll talk about some of these later, and just note before you start getting frustrated with the possibility of losing Express service, know that we are proposing some coverage with other new services and existing local service to minimize the impact on some folks, especially on the segments that are the most productive. And we are also in the TDP, and this is the part you're not seeing. Remember, it's a 10-year window for the TDP. This is year one. So, for example, the 200X, even though we're cutting it, we've actually already talked to staff about a remodified 200X that would go all the way out west to the beaches. It's just not going to be shown here today because it's going to be a TDP implementation. So the TDP needs plan will start enhancing some of these. So while it looks like some of the service is going to go away, depending on funding, some of it may come back in a reconfigured format. All right? So just want to mention that. So, and then if you look at the map on the right, you'll see that while we're decreasing the peak hour commuter express network significantly, we're also increasing the limited express hourly network, which is all day, not just during peak, significantly to 120 trips. So you're going from the 88 total trips on express to now 136. So there's actually more service all day just at 60 minutes. And you can see there in that map that with the red rings, you're actually connecting the airport, downtown Tampa, and Brandon now with 30-minute service with all of the express routes that are going to go between those three areas. So again, these major activity centers are going to get better service connecting them. And then the green rings are showing you Northwest Transfer Center, the UATC, McDill, Britton Plaza, and then down to the South County. You see there that those are going to get 60-minute service all day. So again, in some cases we take and then we give back a little bit to try and make up for that loss. And you'll see this common theme running throughout. So this is the recommended network showing all of the local service and that hourly express shown on the map. And then the peak hour express, of course, I mentioned those would be added, those shown. And now I'm going to take you through some of the individual areas and route modifications. And this isn't by any means exhaustive. Again, I want to try and keep it at a very high level. Again, if you have questions, please ask. But just note that there's a lot more information and metrics behind this than what I'm showing today. I'm just giving you a flavor for the changes. So here you see in West Tampa, and this is one of those areas that is impacted by the West Tampa Transfer Center. It's in a very difficult location that had a very good reason for being there when Tampa Bay Center, if you all remember back in the day, that active mall was there. Good idea. Now it's, one Buccaneer place and Raymond James across the street, and that's shut down every Sunday during football season, or Sundays at their home. So it's not as good a location. There's not as much use around it. So you've got routes going there to connect without much purpose. So we're going to try and change that. So one of the changes we made is, for example, the Route 7. We looked at the Route 7 segment from HCC to Citrus Park, very low productivity segment, and we proposed to cut that. You can see there the map on the right, those red boxes show you the areas that are now missing that type of service. And we're also going to take the Route 14 and realign that to keep it on, take it off Boulevard and move it on to Armenia Howard to give it more of an identity as that Armenia north-south route, and then increase its frequency to 30 minutes. And then Route 7 at its southern end would modify to cover a portion of Boulevard that was covered by the 14. Again, take away, give back. And that would cover that area from Columbus to Cass. And then the Route 7 would be removed from the West Tampa Transfer Center, and it would actually extend out to HCC. So it would become a connector service between the HCC campus and downtown Tampa. So this just gives you a flavor, again, for the modification of 2 specific routes in West Tampa area.
And Joel, if I can
Yes, ma'am.
jump in right here.
Sure.
Excuse me now that I'm coughing at you. Excuse me. We do have the option to talk about what to do with this West Tampa location, and does it make more sense to talk to HCC about a connection at their campus? These
Absolutely.
are commuter campuses. There's a lot of property over there at Dale Mabry. We've got an easement, which is right next to the stadium that I'm confident somebody would be interested in. But again, future years on the DDP, we would be looking at making better use of our access to property and getting to somewhere that makes much more sense if we're going to have a permanent structure out there.
Absolutely. Excellent point. Now, let me take a step back. Before I wanted to show you one route to give you the flavor, and I've been using the term productivity a lot. Let me define that so that you all have a sense for what we go through. And I know that there's been some discussion about public outreach and talking to folks. Know that a COA tends to be more of almost a scientific endeavor in that we use metrics and analysis, an operational assessment, if you will, of the services as they operate at the route and segment level, using these figures such as passenger trips or boardings per revenue mile of service or revenue hours of service. And what we do is we look at the system as a whole. What is the system average? And then what are these routes doing in terms of trips per mile? And how are they comparing to that system average and to one another? And as you get segments that have very low productivity or a low trips per mile, those become candidates for either removal or doing something different, maybe a lower frequency where it's not as frequent. So, for example, the best route in your system currently runs about just over 25 boardings per mile. That's excellent. All right. The system average is only 2.24. Now, I say only, and I'm not trying to denigrate HART, but they are being dragged down by these low-performing routes that I'm going to be talking about throughout the rest of the slide. So if you get rid of low-performing segments and routes, clearly your average is going to go up. And nationally, the average in 2015 using National Transit Database information was 2.62. So you could see that the routes that are performing poorly have dragged HART's average down to something that's lower than the national average. With these being removed and more resources being allocated then to that core, you start to see that number, that 224, going up. So I wanted to give you a sense of when I talk about productivity, that's what we're talking about. All right. So let's look at, again, staying with West Tampa, the routes 10 and 32. The 32 currently operates from that West Tampa Transfer Center, and then it goes out east to the Mango Walmart. We're not proposing to do anything to the route at that eastern end. We're going to keep the eastern half at 60-minute service. The western portion stays 30-minute. But again, to give it more of an identity, West Tampa Transfer Center really doesn't do that for it. So we want to take it to the airport and gives people out east and along this corridor, the MLK corridor, another opportunity to get to the airport and not just using the 30 to get there and having to require several transfers. So it gives it automatically greater identity. So that's what we're proposing to do with the 32. The Route 10, again, another low productivity route. It's only, I think the whole route's about 1.36 on that trips per mile scale. So we're going to remove the 10 and use those resources to create a new Route 11. The 10 operates currently on Cypress Street. We would shift it up north a bit and operate on Main and Spruce, and then give it an identity by taking it all the way to International Plaza. All right? Good.
Could I,
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
So in that graph, you have which route is the blue and which is the green?
The blue is the proposed new Route 11, and then the green is the existing 32, but with an extension out to the airport.
So where would they transfer? If I wanted to go downtown on that, would I have to get off and then get back on the green?
If you wanted to go downtown from the green, typically what you would do
Or
is
from
jump.
downtown to the airport, I'm sorry.
Well, I have a lot of other options, but if they wanted to do that, they would take MTC, probably take the 1 and go up and then transfer. And once they get to MLK, jump off and then jump on the 32 and go to the airport.
I was just going to comment that I know, I think if it doesn't look like if you extend it a little bit further, you could go into the airport. I just would like to see more airport service, but I guess you're just showing me the new and not the total of all the routes. Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So this is new airport service because there's currently nothing coming from that east and west direction
Right.
to take it to the airport. So this would be new.
Okay.
And then this connects with the 30, so someone can then connect at the airport and take the 30 and go into downtown. So this is all about options as well, which is the beauty of a grid network. You have different ways of getting where you need to go, so you can almost pick whichever one shows up next to get you there.
Okay.
All right.
So does this
I'm sorry,
then
Commissioner, go ahead.
replace our thoughts of putting express bus service on West Kennedy Boulevard, and we're shifting it a little bit further north to get to the airport?
As we proceed forward, both with the regional transit plan and this project, we'll see that we can go faster when we're not on Kennedy. You also see more options coming up as we get further in. We
Well,
can
I
go from downtown
definitely
to the airport.
I definitely agree with you.
Yes.
And I think that is the direction we should go, because I don't know where you're going to go on Kennedy. When I see a bus, man, I run for the hills.
Right. Right. And that's a great question. And one thing, Commissioner, that we are not trying to do is impact any future plans, because that's, again, part of that TDP. Things that could come in the future will be in that next 10 years or beyond, looking at Scott's regional plan.
Very good.
So what we're trying to focus on is what do we do in year one to make this better service, quicker service, and deal with the budget.
This is going to be better and quicker, for sure.
We hope so.
I love it because you're going to build ridership, and that is the key.
That's the
If
key.
you get more people per mile, you increase the fare box recovery, especially on those express routes where it's like 7%. You know, this is great. This is really great.
Thank you. Good. Well, you haven't seen the rest of the slides, so hold your judgment until then.
Okay.
I still have time to screw
Let's
up.
stop here. I mean, have you guys just
Let me
been
drop your
working
mic.
like 24/7
Yep.
since our last meeting?
I haven't.
Really?
I've been
Yeah.
relaxing at home. Those guys have.
I mean, because I'm telling you, at the last meeting, we weren't even close.
Oh, and you've seen nothing
And
yet.
I mean,
know.
this is
I
a
flipped through all the
dramatic-
slides. I'm sorry. I went ahead and looked at them, all the savings. So my question is going to be,
Go
what's the
ahead.
estimated cost savings of this?
Oh man, you had me to want it.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a cost savings.
There
There
is, and let me preface that with a caveat.
Estimated was the key word that I used.
And I'm glad you used that. Thank you so much. We are using Remix, the tool that HART purchased, to make sure that we're getting our money out of that tool. And we're using it very much to create a bunch of scenarios. And that gives you an estimate of cost savings and savings in terms of revenue hours. However, once we have the network and the route modifications that you all have approved, we're going to go in and have to work with Philip and staff to schedule those. And so it's going to be tweaked. Right now, with what I'm showing you, we're estimating about 200 weekday hours of savings.
Wow.
That's per day. So what that translates to, right now the rule of thumb working with HART, because their current fully allocated cost is about, give or take, $100 an hour. And what we're estimating is about 1 to 1.5 million of savings per 100 hours saved. So we think we're somewhere in the 3 to 4 million range. And then once we tweak it, it could be as high as 5. But until we get into the actual scheduling, I don't.
So you would increase ridership and save the organization
$3 million.
$3 to
That's
$5
the
million.
intent. And it's not just increased ridership. Also, that's important, but I think Commissioner said it
Service
very well.
delivery areas,
We're going to
right.
increase productivity on
Right.
the routes because
Right.
your folks, even though they will complain about loss of service, they're very malleable. And they will figure out how to get where they need to go using the service. And then they're going to use the routes that are there more productively. So you're going to have more people
Right.
using these increased frequency routes.
Yeah, it's very impressive. Very impressive.
All right. So West Tampa, discontinue the utilization, as Catherine had pointed out. What do we do with that? We'll figure that out. But in terms of its land use, the change that occurred there, that's impacted you. And it does create a waste of travel time getting in and out of the facility.
So, parking spaces at the Bucks game, you'll probably make a lot of money.
Didn't think of that. So that particular, whatever you do with that facility, now what would occur is much like you see in a regular grid network, the buses are going to connect on street at intersections. And then where major connections are occurring, that's where you can increase the infrastructure to support that.
You really don't need this with the DOT building that new multimodal center
Right.
on Cypress, because I think that's going to be a huge focal point for transfers. And
And that
things
creates a
coming
new
down.
identity for the
It really
routes,
does.
more so than this little
Yeah.
center does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
exactly. Great point. All right, let's go on to the university area and change gears a little bit. Now, the first thing I'll tell you is there's two main routes that penetrate the campus, the routes 5 and 6. And because of the increase of students on campus, the Bull Runner has a lot more service on campus. There's a lot more congestion. So the buses are getting bogged down as they are on campus. So an easy fix is taking them off of campus and shifting them over to 30th, where there's a lot of development occurring with Veterans Hospital and Moffitt and all of those uses there. So that was really an easy fix. It gets them out of the congestion, it gets them quicker to UATC, and it allows Bull Runner to do what it's supposed to be doing on campus, and we're still going to have connections with that service. Now, that Fletcher Northern boundary discussion. Bull Runner is also going into the apartment complexes and student housing on the north side of Fletcher. So there's a lot of circulation up there that we're duplicating with the routes, the 1, the 18, the 33, and the 57. So we're proposing shifting all those routes down. We take them out of direction a lot to just go up and do a couple of housing locations and then bring them back to Fletcher. So we're going to keep all of those on Fletcher, saving, again, some time and allowing you to either enhance the frequency or to better stay on the time of the existing schedule. All right?
Is there any thought to doing or asking the county to participate in PD&E on 30th as it kind of goes into Bruce B. Downs, going north up to Hunter's Green and New Tampa and that area, to see if there's maybe room for dedicated lanes for
That is a
express
prime,
service?
absolutely, for a transit corridor study.
I think that's a really,
and you'll see that
really
with
good one.
the regional talking about connectivity to New Tampa that Scott shows the lines on the map.
Put that on our list for the county too.
Because that traffic from New Tampa, Wesley Chapel, it's only going to grow with the development growing out there. So something on that corridor is going to be
Well,
very
we
good.
Get
invested-
ahead of the population move. Anticipate it instead
well,
of
I
reacting.
mean, the county. I think the county's invested almost $200 million in Bruce B. Downs. I mean, it's a unbelievable amount of money. So we ought to start trying to get some return on that investment.
And we also have the hyperlink up here, which could also deal with some of the loss of service north of Fletcher as well, and that could be enhanced. And that's something that we'll talk about as we do the TDP again. So let's stick with the university area. This is one of those that speaks directly to what we've seen in the press and what we've heard from the outreach, and that is the 3 key activity centers in the community, USF, downtown, airport, need better connectivity, quicker connectivity. So we're proposing one of these express services, and we've just designated the 400X so we don't get it confused with other things we're doing. But we're proposing it to be a 60-minute all-day service using primarily 275, connecting those 3 activity centers, UATC to downtown, the MTC, and then out to the airport, or what would be that new multimodal transfer facility that FDOT is contemplating. So this would give you frequent service and quick service because it would obviously be limited stop. So that's one change. Route 57, because of its unproductivity, we propose for it to go away, and then we're going to make changes to the Route 6 to cover some of its more productive segments, as well as extending the Route 39, which currently functions on Bush Boulevard, and have it go across Bullard to the Temple Terrace Junction, and then it would continue on its normal routing. So it's going to cover some of those segments that we lose with the 57, but you can see there the areas that are shown with the red blocks. Those areas are also low productivity, typically below half to 0.5, 0.6 riders per mile, significantly below the system average. East Tampa, all right, and this is where we talk about Metro Rapid. Currently, as you know, Metro Rapid operates on Nebraska Avenue. It does so concurrently with the Route 2, which used to be the top route in the entire agency before Metro Rapid's implementation. What is occurring now is the total ridership has grown between the 2 routes, but not necessarily more so than what probably would have occurred naturally with Route 2 on its own. So you have a lot of resources being expended on this corridor, and you have 2 routes that are basically competing with each other. We've got anecdotal information from both drivers and riders that they just wait at the stop, and whichever one shows up first, they're jumping on.
All right.
So if that's going to be the case, then let's make them have an easier decision and get rid of the Route 2, have them only decide to ride the Metro Rapid and take it from 15 minutes to 12 minutes service. And then with that separate hourly route I mentioned going from UATC out to Hidden River. So that's going to be a significant savings in what we've been discussing, and then those out resources could either be savings or reallocated. So that's the big change there. The Route 34 I've already mentioned, Hillsboro, that's your key east-west spine. That goes to 15 minutes. And then the Route 1 I mentioned before, Florida Avenue, specifically south of Hillsboro, will go to 15 minutes. North of Hillsboro will be 30-minute service. Right now it varies throughout time of day, anywhere from 15 to 60-minute frequencies, and we're going to keep it 30-minute consistently, and then 15 minutes south. Now let's talk about the 9, the 12, and the 18.
Oh, Director.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just
No,
kind of mulling that last comment, that last slide.
Yes. Let me
So
go back to
currently
it.
on Route 2, we have many more stops than
Question.
Metro Rapid. And
Yes,
we're
we do.
only adding in 2 to Metro Rapid. So we're going to severely limit, aren't we?
Oh, no, we're not only adding in 2. I'm sorry, that says additional Route 2 stops. We're going to add in more stops to cover what was done with Route 2.
Okay. Do
Additional
we have an
route.
idea?
Yeah.
My concern is that's one of our highest routes, I know, and I don't know, I just think we might be limiting where people can go, because currently Metro Rapid just has so few stops on it.
Correct. And what we've done is we've actually done an analysis of the Metro Rapid stops versus the Route 2 stops and which ones are the most utilized for Route 2.
Okay.
And then we're going to look at stop spacing.
Okay, because I hate for it to go a mile before they could.
No. And HART does have guidelines on bus stop spacing.
Okay.
It was done quite a while ago. I'm not sure when it was last updated, but we'll follow those guidelines and make sure that we don't have anyone walking more than that kind of quarter mile, which is typical.
Okay.
And so we will recommend new stops. And then those stops, they just probably won't get the infrastructure that's at the existing Metro Rapid, but they will get the same branding with a sign and whatever other infrastructure is there.
Have we modeled how long from the start of, from endpoint to endpoint? Is that going to increase, even though we're increasing frequency? Would it maybe increase, though, the overall travel time from endpoints? Because we're making more stops.
A, we didn't model it.
Okay.
And B, I don't think it will, and here's why. One of the issues you have is your TSP, the signal priority.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really getting triggered because it's conditional, and you don't have enough people on the bus to ever trigger it for the Metro Rapid. So we're thinking if everybody, because 40% of the ridership, I think, if I remember what Steve had told me, was on Metro Rapid, 60% on 2. If now you have 100% of the ridership on Metro Rapid, it's going to be quite full. There's a better chance that the signal priority triggers will be occurring more frequently. So that's one savings. And then the 12-minute frequency should also help.
Okay.
It doesn't have an exclusive lane, so there's still nothing we could do about the congestion issue.
Right.
But that's something else to
No,
consider
and I
in the
think
future.
that's a fair rebuttal.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just Justin Begley, HART Planning Staff. I just wanted to mention there was an analysis about 2 years ago which showed the Metro Rapid offers about a 10% travel time savings over the 2.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, that will be lower if we're going to add some stops and there'll be additional ridership. But considering the issues with signal priority and the increased loads, we'll get more out of that capacity on the bus. And it won't be backing up or stacking up south of Hillsboro where there's no way to pass.
Right.
So when it all shakes out, the hope is that the ridership will be similar. And this is some information they brought to us as well.
I love it. I mean, if it helps with the signal, I think, again, you're going to help so many commuters trying to get through these bottlenecks. So.
Well, and frankly, Karen, one of the things we want to help too is make Metro Rapid more of that shining bus rapid transit example that it was always meant to be,
yeah.
so that Hillsboro Avenue, as your east-west spine, could eventually become one as well. Because you're not going to get it to transform into that without the success of the initial route,
I agree.
right? Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Well, I mean, the essence of Express in Metro Rapid never has really truly been realized because the buses were full.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going to have full buses. We can use the bus signalization, and maybe it will be a little more rapid. But, of course, without dedicated lanes, nothing's going to be really fast. So it's the way it is. But no, I think it sounds good going forward. Absolutely.
Okay, so are we ready to head to East Tampa?
We are.
Yeah.
Figuratively, of course, not. So let's look at the 9, which operates on 15th Street, and the Route 12 on 22nd. That's the one in the middle. So you kind of have the red one on the left. If you're looking under existing alignment, the red one on the left, that's the 9, 15th Street, 22nd, that's the 12, and then the 18 is on the right, and that is on 30th Street. The southern portion, and this is all south of Rowlett Park, the river, where they all converge. And the southern portion of the 18 is very unproductive. The northern portion, interestingly enough, of the 9 is very unproductive. So what we did was they really are serving a lot of the same corridors north of the river and then south of this point. So we combine the two routes. The 9 and the 18 then become a single route. The low productivity segments are removed, and then we've increased the frequency on the Route 12 to make up for that loss of service to provide more of that north-south frequency in this corridor. And you can see in the last graphic all the way on the right, we showed you just the walk, that kind of shaded gray area is the walk buffer, quarter mile. And you could see that there are only a few pockets with the removal of these services that are not going to provide, not have walk access. They will be within half a mile certainly, but not within the quarter mile. And so this would be an area that maybe something could be done in the future to enhance access to those routes, whether through Flex or Hyperlink. All right, so let's move on to the other portion of East Tampa. And this is specifically two routes, the 15 and the 41. The 15 operates in the east-west direction on Columbus. It provides direct connectivity between Net Park and the West Tampa location. It's low productivity throughout most of its eastern length, and that's because it goes out of direction to Orient and up and cycles back around to Net Park. So what we've proposed is if it's so low productivity over there, there's nobody using it, people are having to ride all that distance, let's just cut it up 50th and take it directly to Net Park. So that you see some of this is just logic, easy improvements. Some of them are a little more difficult to achieve. Like in the case of 41, this is a tough one. It is an east-west route with somewhat of an identity, but it's very low productivity throughout its length. It is about 1.26 trips per mile, which is significantly lower than the system average. And you still have a lot of coverage, especially with a lot of north-south routes covering the length of that route. And so we've proposed at this point just to take this route away. All right, downtown. Downtown is unique in that you have the Marion Transitway. It is going to be a test bed for the AV pilot, and so there is some concern that the density of transit vehicles there at any time during the day may impact that. And it's also very frustrating for the drivers because the Transitway has a lot of stops along it. There should be some consolidation of those stops, and so there's a lot of delay using the Transitway for some of the routes, especially like the one that is going to be more frequent. So one of the things we're discussing is possibly shifting a few of those north-south routes out of the Transitway, let them circulate around downtown, A, to get more transit coverage in downtown, and B, so that they can maintain their travel time and not get bogged down in the Transitway. So with the one, for example, it would use the one-way pair of Florida and Tampa streets, and then come down to Whiting. So it's going to have greater access to the garages and the office buildings and provide additional connectivity within downtown. Of course, there's going to be implications for the downtown or the in-towner, and what do we do with those, and how do we connect them? That's something that we'll also be looking into. So that just gives you a flavor for downtown, and then the stop consolidation I mentioned on the Transitway is something that we'll look at.
Can I ask you, are you going to use the rubber wheel trolley on this?
No, these would be the regular local routes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, these are the local routes. What we're suggesting is when they come into downtown, they either go to MTC and then to the Transitway, or they go directly to the Transitway, and we're suggesting that we pull them out of there and actually let them have some stops in the downtown area. It's not all the routes. Still, a lot of the east-west routes coming in would use the Transitway. It's just a few of those core north-south to get
Okay.
them in and out.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I have a comment about that a little bit later as you keep going.
Okay. Something else, and this is more global, not just a particular area, but I mentioned that one of the things we want to do is try and enhance the convenience of the express services to get people to these major activity centers and connecting those. So we have this express that we've given a number. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's a northwest transfer center to the airport, to downtown, to Brandon kind of route. So it's a major east-west corridor that is express, and it's all-day hourly service connecting these areas. So that's one. And then we're also, in conjunction with this, we're going to turn the 30 around, because now the 30 no longer needs to go to the northwest transfer facility if this express route's going to do it. So that gets to truncate the 30 and make that more efficient service going directly from the airport to downtown. So that gives you another route now connecting downtown and the airport. There's another express connecting McDill to downtown to Brandon that is proposed in that graphic at the top. And then the one route that we're talking about is removing a segment of Route 46. It's a low productivity segment. In fact, I believe it's somewhere on the order of about 0.45, if I remember correctly. So it's a very low productivity segment there.
Is that the one that goes down Dale Mabry and cuts through neighborhoods?
No, this is the one on the
South
bottom
Tampa.
graphic. This is the one that comes in from Brandon, and then it goes across to downtown Tampa, not using the crosstown. And so the eastern portion of that route will be covered by the express. The western portion would go away.
Okay.
All right. Let's talk about South Tampa. South Tampa, the first route, 19, currently operates as a loop on West Shore and Manhattan. We're going to try and take that and make it a linear route. Again, give it identity, have it connect that South Tampa area with Britton Plaza, only using Manhattan, which is the more productive segment. So it's not really a loss of service. It's just making it operate both north and south directions on the same corridor. And we're also, I don't show it in this presentation, but in the TDP, we're going to show expansion of flex in this area. So some of the loss would be made up with flex.
Please, this will get rid of the empty bus.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So that's what we're again with the unproductive segments getting eliminated. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Route 36 at Dale Mabry, it goes south all the way to McDill. That segment is unproductive, and with the express that we have numbered 360X, which goes from Brandon downtown to McDill, it's going to cover that same portion. So we're going to truncate, cut short the 36, and have it stop at Britton Plaza. So it'll be able to provide connectivity to this area, but not have to go all the way down to McDill. That would be covered by something else. Again, getting rid of that redundancy. The Route 4, that's a low productivity route, and because of some of the other changes we've made to the 19 and with that express, most of its route is already covered, so we suggest getting rid of that route. And the Route 14 would truncate a little bit farther north of where it turns around now, and it would turn around at Swan Avenue. And so you see
that's where I see the empty buses on Swan Avenue.
Right now, that bus goes down into the community south of Swan and turns around to come up.
Right.
And so that segment is unproductive, so we're truncating it where we see more of the use.
Okay, have you thought about, and you may consider flex down in this area, make it more a circulator?
When we come back to the board, I believe it's June 5th, we'll be presenting the TDP needs plan, which will encompass this information for year one and then the others. And you're going to see some new flex and some new services with the hyperlink. And this area is one of them.
Well, and that's why I was thinking the rubber wheel trolley that runs around downtown, why can't that be extended like into Hyde Park or over to West Tampa, to help take up, to create more of a commuter, a circulator service, but also get some ridership going.
We actually have started talking about that possibility. So that's on the table.
Very good, because I know they could, the visiting of a bay could possibly use it for heritage tourism. They could, promote that with incoming conventions and things like that.
Sure. We have talked about what to do with that trolley to make it more useful. And we've also talked, quite frankly, about getting rid of it completely. So obviously everything is on the table when you're just...
Is that going to be in the June
TDP
5th presentation?
That what we propose to do with that would be in that June 5th.
Oh, good. Okay,
Yes.
so...
Because it's not a COA, well, it could have been a COA. It's more of a change in the future, not maybe a year one. So that's why you're not going to see it today.
Because what's happening right now, the hotels downtown, all these conventions come, and all these people want to know where can they go to shop. And there's only two places. It's Hyde Park or International. Well, West Shore too. And so they send. So if we had the trolley that could go into Hyde Park, they could take that option, or we could put them on another option that could take them to the mall or to West Shore. So I'm just saying that if
Ubers
they don't,
are $5 from downtown to
and Uber.
or Lyft
True.
or any of those. I mean, they're
But I'm
$5 or
trying,
$6.
we're trying to let
I know,
people
but-
see our community, not just get in the car.
Sure.
Thanks.
Good point. All right. Let's continue now to go to Brandon and South County. These are my last couple slides. Save the best for last. So the 53LX, it is the least productive route in the entire network. This route, we've proposed for it to go, and then we've enhanced some of the other routes, including conversion of Route 31 into a limited express all-day service that would connect Brandon Mall and then head south into that South County area. And it would also connect to the 24X and the 25X peak express routes. Brandon Mall, in effect, with the changes that we've made, or proposed, I should say, the changes that we proposed at Brandon Mall with the express services, Brandon Mall is now going to have 60-minute service all day to downtown, to MacDill, to the Northwest Transfer Center, and to the airport. So there's going to be better connectivity from an express standpoint. We still, frankly, we need more density in this portion to make the local service more productive. So that's why we're taking the local service out for now, putting in the express to take advantage. We know there are people down there that have to get places, so let's get them there with express. And then as more density occurs, more development, more activity centers, then the local service can follow. Okay. And with that, I'm done. Just to give you an overview of what we're doing next very quickly is final tweaks. We've been working with staff. We had a meeting late Friday so we could prepare for this morning. Once we have a good feel for the network that we're proposing from the COA standpoint that'll go into year one of the TDP, we'll be taking that out to you the June 5th to make sure that you're comfortable with it and the needs plan of the TDP. And then we'll be doing the public outreach with that final version to get folks to weigh in on it as well. Once we have an idea of what the final network looks like for year one, we'll work with Philip and staff on scheduling, make sure we understand what that cost is going to be, and hopefully not too much of an estimate, something a little closer to reality. And then the short, medium, and long-term recommendations will funnel into that 10-year plan of the TDP. And that's how the two are going to connect, is in that needs plan. And then we'll also have a cost-feasible version, as I mentioned, that looks at what can we do with our current revenue streams that we're projecting out for the 10-year period. And with that, any other questions?
And before we turn it over, Joe, I do want to note that another change for us on the TDP is the previous 2-year TDP had been very responsive to Go Hillsborough. We had done the longer term, and it's almost an artificial constraint because we were building to $30 million a year, not
Correct.
What is good for service. And then prior to that, it was living through the recession. So this is the first time in many years that we have looked at service and what's responsive and good for the neighborhoods. What does good service look like, and how can we take that format out further? So it is a different way to do service, and we don't thank consultants because it's your job. Just kidding. But I do want to give a big thank you to our staff that has been working around the clock since last fall on this, in addition to all the other outreach, to the Tesla launch, to everything else that's been going on. It's a Herculean task, and as a planner, something I don't tell my mother I ever said this, I could not have generated this. So our team has exceeded my expectations and capabilities, and I'm happy to say that on both. So excellent job to the entire team.
Thank you, and for the entire team, they've been great to work with, and I thank you
course.
too. This is fun stuff for us, and we like that you like it because that makes it much more fun.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that this is breathtaking, excellent, wonderful. This is exactly the kinds of things that we needed to do. I mean, it's just, as I've said before, the holy grail to me of transit is frequency. I really appreciated the detail. I appreciated seeing kind of the quarter-mile walk, all the patterns you did, all the outlining. It was so dense. It was somewhat, hard to follow, although I'll keep looking at it and go back. And I could see the logic and appreciate the wholesale forward movement of exactly what you did. Really a huge realignment that I think makes such great sense and was done with such care. So thank you so much. I think that this is really an excellent template moving forward. A small, in the future, maybe this would be planned, but one thing I've noticed that they've done on transit maps across the country, and we really couldn't do it here because we didn't really have much to speak of. And again, the grid and the frequency are everything, or huge part of the service we do, but that they have been doing mapping where you would see the routes that were the 15-minute routes or less, and we really only had one, that it would be in same light color. So if you looked at your transit map, you could see the true outline of the great fast service, and then have the other ones done in another color, the 30-minute, the 60-minute, and have it, instead of by route, have it show up that way, so that by frequency, so that it pops out to consumers using it, where are the best routes for them to take. But I just think this is really wonderful, that it will really increase our numbers and serve more people and get them to where they want to go more quickly. So this is really, really excellent. And I'm not sure whether here or at the HART Board Meeting, and this will be presented there also. Maybe
In
not
June
with
5th.
such in June.
June 5th, he's going to bring back the final.
That'll be the TDP needs plan,
TDP that they're going
and
to
the
take to the
COA will be a
public.
part of that. It probably won't be as extensive or detailed, but we'll have this as backup in case we need it.
And we'll be bringing this constituted as, here are the changes proposed for the fall, and a highlight for the board, and also everyone not on this committee will talk to individually ahead of time, because this is information dense. But we'll be bringing it to the board to say, let's kick off our outreach, so we have the whole summer to talk to folks.
I would really like to identify in here and move forward a few of these projects through the board, and also make a request to our county commission, board of county commissioners, for additional funding of some of these identified projects, especially projects that increase frequency. And I would really like to move that forward, and I'm not sure exactly what the how we should move this forward through this committee, through the board.
Well, I think the process would be, obviously it has to go to the board for HART. And we need to put our stamp of approval on, so this is what you're going to take to the public. There could be further changes, correct?
There will definitely be changes.
But it's something to get the community conversation going and go from there. I think Catherine needs to take the parts that we feel would benefit. At this point, it's with the homestead exemption problem. We don't, the excess cash we have laying around isn't going to be as plentiful as it once was. But I still think there's going to be some dollars that can be used to help move some of these issues forward. I think at that point, Catherine needs to sit down and identify those that reap the biggest ROI, and then maybe make that report on June 5th to the board also. I would say probably your top two things.
And we continue to work with county staff on more infrastructure-intensive projects such as PD&Es, a BRT review for the entire county stuff, which more closely aligns with the transportation
Actually,
programs.
I
and
would
how we
sit
have.
down with this report with the county, go over it before June 5th, and say, and the question is, how can this is what I'd like your help on, and then from that point forward, at least you've got some kind of an agreement.
I will just.
I'm sorry, I was just going to make a quick point on that. One of the things I want to make sure you understand, going back to Catherine's original question about how much savings, keep in mind that a lot of the changes that we've made, those resources get reallocated, so the net savings are truly net savings. So a lot of the proposed frequency increases are included in that. So the budget will cover all of these changes that we've proposed, assuming that we come up with a number that's very close to
That'd be great.
what's needed.
Yeah, I think that's,
So that's just one point I want to make sure you
The
understood.
selling point for our Board of County Commissioners is.
But HART would never turn away any additional money from the funding from
Oh,
the
no.
commission
Right.
to expedite this. I mean, if I could vote today, I would vote to implement this today. I mean, with all due respect to the public's engagement, which I think is very important, and I'm a big advocate of, this is something that is, I don't want to say past due. I'd like to say it's an excellent job. It is something that will, put HART into a next generation of sort of thoughtful leadership in terms of being responsive to its riders.
Absolutely.
And from a color-coded map, you can do that online instantaneously. So printing maps, get that out of your head. It should be right on here where people can
I
pull
don't
it up.
disagree, although we do
And
have riders that don't have access.
most riders do. 97% of people in America today have some ability to dial online. So I think we should have an interactive map. I think you should know where the buses are, and I think you should have choices before you leave your house if you've got multiple areas of coverage.
That's a very good point. Very good point. And Commissioner Kepfeiner, you're not finished?
That's okay. I preliminarily had asked Ms. Egan for some preliminary projections on some of these routes and cost if we were to move them forward to the county, and had some numbers worked out for something like $728,000 on Route 1. And some of the routes that I think are the most important routes moving forward. Route 30 to the Town and Country and Airport, $1.5 million. Route 34, again, $1.5 million approximately. And then a BRT study. These are all preliminary, but I just wanted to bring them forward right now. BRT study to evaluate corridors, and that's throughout the county. And I know you had mentioned that with Bruce B. Downs, which I think is excellent. And take preferred corridor to about a 30% PD&E, and something like that would be a ballpark of approximately $1 million. So I just wanted to note that here. I think that those are really key priority projects, and I would like to, be looking at having. Again, I've said it many times that our ad valorem not be our ceiling, but to be our floor, and be looking at every other county except for Pinellas and our county are the only two counties that fund strictly and exclusively from ad valorem taxes. The others, or an ad valorem set aside, I should say, the others are funded by countywide tax sources. And so I'd really like to be looking at that kind of contribution in addition.
Great comments. Director G.
Thank you. I'll jump on the bandwagon. I think this is really terrific and it's great work. However, I do want to emphasize that this is a piece of improving our performance, that the total experience is what brings people there, and we can have the best routes and the fastest routes and the most efficient routes, but if the experience of getting to the bus and waiting for the bus is not very good, then it diminishes our ability to achieve our goals. So I really want to look at what are the other things we can do to help those experiences that our riders and our potential customers will get with that. It's, what's the experience at waiting for the bus? What kind of how does it connect to the streetscape. Where is it safe? Is it sheltered? All of these things. In addition, if we're having areas that are being eliminated and they are requiring that people will have a different route, which they have to be a pedestrian to get there, how is that being connected with the city's Complete Streets program and their sidewalk program as well? Because I really think that that's an important aspect of it, and we should be thinking about that as well. If we're going to invest resources, the total experience is truly important. And this as a first step is magnificent, and I love it, but I also want to look at how do we continue to improve that complete experience.
Great point. And you're absolutely right. In fact, DOT feels very strongly about that. They have the Accessing Transit course, which talks to how do you get people to the stop, provide comfortable, convenient, safe infrastructure for them to wait at, and then access the bus. And that training, in fact, I'll just put it out there, is Friday in Ocoee. So if you have an interest in joining, that'd be great. We'd love to have you. Complete Streets is becoming a big component. We should see in July the final Complete Streets handbook. So the connectivity between what the adjacent land use, the accessible pathway, the transit infrastructure at the stop, and then the vehicle itself is critical. Because you're right.
Exactly.
At the course, I tell folks, when people are driving by your bus stop in their car, that's their first entree to what the system is all about. And so if they see garbage piled up against the shelter and graffiti on the walls of the shelter, they're not going to be very interested in trying it out. So you want to give them an experience with their first introduction to transit. You want to see something that you go, wow, I wouldn't mind sitting there and waiting for a bus, especially if the bus is going to be along in 10, 12 minutes. So great point.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question. So all these, like where you had the red boxes, they're like
Yes, ma'am.
circulators. Are you going to come back to us? Are you going to use hyperlink, or is it going to be flex? Is it going to be van pools? Are you going to evaluate the costs of that and give us, that recommendation? Because I think that's really important for us.
Sure.
I know the county wants to invest in more hyperlink projects, especially out in the outlying areas where we need to build up ridership and service.
Well, the easy answer is yes to everything you just said.
Okay, so
That's in the
on
TDP.
June 5th, so you guys this is preliminary, you're going to keep working.
Yes.
We're going to get kind of the final recommendation of what you're going to say, van pools, hyperlink, flex, or whatever it's going to be.
There's
Not to be-
waterborne
yeah.
in there too.
That's right, and not to be a wet blanket, but the red squares are showing areas where there would not be coverage. So one of the projects which has gone on with the TDP is if an entire route would be removed, looking at where the highest ridership areas were, are they still within a quarter mile of another route?
Okay.
So this is a device to show, and you may have an entire route removed, but the least productive 10% is removed, and then that ends up being 3% of the ridership.
Well, I personally think this is transformational, and that's what we really wanted you and the staff to come back with. Give us a plan that we can really sink our teeth into that lines up with the corridors that Scott Pringle and his group is trying to put forward at Jacobs. I saw the lineup. I mean, you could see it all lining up, and we have to build ridership because Director Jarosh is right. We have to show how many people are riding these buses that could eventually use higher transit going down the road. And I think it's really, really critical to build this ridership. Love the savings. I do want to see the rubber wheel trolley used as circulator around Hyde Park to downtown, maybe even to Ybor for destinations. So, I think it's great. I went back to my list of the top 10 in my 10-point plan for 10 years for HART, for our TDP, and actually almost every box was checked off. I was so excited. We increased the frequency on bus routes on key development routes. We did that. We did, we can't really do this yet, advanced PD&E on Hillsborough Avenue and Dale Mabry. We're going to be on 30th Street and Bruce B. Downs to that list. But those are FDOT roads too, and so we need to bring them into the fold to see if they would partner with the county to help us on some of this PD&E for dedicated lanes. The top 10 commuter routes, obviously, you made that very well known today. You're going to come back to us with using more van pools for some of these lower ridership routes. Enhancing circulator service, you're going to come back with that. That's really good. Enhancing peak hour service, investing in Hyperlink. I mean, this is great. Now, we didn't talk about maintenance facilities. Their favorite subject.
Will be it. The footprint here will be a smaller fleet, so we will be in a much better position
and
to use
how
what
we
we
can use
have.
the city and county yards to help us cut down our costs on almost having to build this new maintenance facility, though I know we're going to have to do it at some point.
We'll bring back capital as part of the TDP. This was more operational, so the capital discussion, we did begin that conversation with staff on Friday afternoon about some of the capital needs.
It was great. I mean, the frequency grids, improving commuter service, building ridership, I mean, everything. Eliminating the empty bus syndrome, that excites me the most. So I'm really, it's transformational for me. So it's great. Commissioner Kemp.
You reminded me of one other point I wanted to bring forward because I saw 3 key circulator points that we had, which is the downtown, which seems to be being dealt with, the university area because of the university jumping in and some other arrangements that were made. It looks like we have something, and hyperlink there. But the third area is West Shore, which we haven't talked about, and I really think that also is something that we need to focus on and be thinking about. And that, again, is something that I would like the county, but I think it's also obviously ripe for a 3P type of project, and to look at investment by some of the big players out at West Shore that could possibly help to work out some kind of circulator in the West Shore area and a plan for that.
Absolutely. I mean, what they did up in USF could absolutely be replicated in West Shore. And I think they actually have more major corporate involvement out there. So, okay. Well, we're going to move along because I know 3 of us have to be out of here at 11:30. We sure do. Because we're all speaking somewhere. So thank you all very much. Great report. Very exciting. I think the board will be very excited. We do have 2 action items that we need to take care of today, so turn this over to you.
And Ruthie Reyes-Burkhart, our Chief Operating Officer, has the first action item.
Good morning. Asking the board to consider to authorize Catherine to purchase up to 9 gasoline-powered Chevy Cutaway Power Transit vehicles, and those are replacement vehicles in the amount of not to exceed $652,941. The vehicles are 2 years in the need of replacement. The state contract was delayed for some time in making the vehicles available for purchase for HART, and this is our first opportunity to obtain these type of larger cutaway vehicles for this paratransit service, for the demand service.
Great.
So
Okay.
Second.
Motion by Director Bowers, second by Director Jarosh. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Like sign opposed. Show that pass.
Our second action item, I believe, is going to be carried by Al Burns, our Director of Procurement, or as a designee for our CFO.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Al Burns, Director of Procurement and Contracts Administration for HART. This morning I bring before you the committee action item to authorize the Chief Executive Officer to award a 14-month contract with 2 one-year options for general litigation and personal injury legal services to the following law firms. And I might mispronounce some of them, I apologize. Abbey Adams and Bialik and Mueller, LLP, Dean Riggers, Morgan and Lawton, PA, and Quinteros, Prato, Wood, and Boyer, PA. The overview. HART does not have a current contract for legal services in general litigation and personal injury. However, support in these categories is needed. The top-ranking offerers are recommended for the contract award. The law firms will provide assistance for legal matters outside the expertise of the HART Legal Department and additional bandwidth for pending litigation matters. It went through a competitive solicitation process. We had a number of offerors or firms submit proposals on it, and the project manager, Mr. Michael Rosen, an internal counsel, recommend that we move the top 4 firms forward and enter into negotiations with them.
And if we have further questions, our newly minted Director of Legal Services, Sylvia Berrien, is here. She can answer the technical questions. Madam Director.
Are there any questions? Is there board action?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Kemp, seconded by Director Bowers. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Like, sign, and post. Show that pass.
Thank you for your
Thank you
consideration.
very much for your hard work.
And we will keep you posted as the post-session wraps up on the status of our hyperlink request. It is still in the budget, but thanks to a lot of work by our staff, single staff, I'm looking at Caesar, but Caesar with the advocacy group has hyperlink our downtown project in the budget. We'll see where that goes. And we will also keep you posted of the governor's action on the T-Barter restructuring bill.
Absolutely. Okay, this was an excellent meeting. Thank you all for your hard work, and I really think the board's going to be excited. So, are we able to make a statement that we were in favor of the proposed? I would like to show the board that
Second.
this committee did, is favorable towards the plan that came forward. I do think it's important to have that come from a committee. So if Commissioner Kemp makes the motion that we recommend the TDP preliminary plan to move forward to the board, I think that would
Thank
be great.
you. I wasn't sure what protocol was exactly, but I'd like to make that motion first.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, and second? Second. And by Director Bowers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Like, sign, and post. Show that pass. Great. Okay,
But
good work.
Commissioner, if I may, would it be proper that during the presentation at the board meeting that somebody representing this committee would state that in
Yeah,
the
I'll do it
presentation?
as
I mean,
chairman.
as somebody
Oh, yes.
to make sure that the board, the entire board, understands the importance we place on this and
Absolutely.
our complete support of where this is going and how it's
Done a lot of
continuing.
work.
Yeah, this is absolutely terrific.
Okay, guys. Great. We are adjourned. Have a beautiful day. Great work week.
But we're still here.